Okay, good afternoon. The last name is pronounced Wiesinger, Chris Wiesinger. So for hundreds of years, our way of describing things and locations hinged on words and drawings. How many words, how many drawings would it need to precisely describe this scene to somebody else? How much effort would it take to translate those words and those drawings back into an accurate reimagination? That's the power of perception, the power of being there. And so I'd like to ask you to imagine with me the range of new possibilities opened up by providing a new space for collaborative conversations, powered by visualization technologies that underpin BIM, and the technologies that allow immersive games to produce that sense of being there. New possibilities opened up by the transformation of very data-intensive explanations into experiences that produce valuable insight for professionals and non-professionals alike. And new possibilities opened up by seeing sustainability through a different lens on waste. In our view, these possibilities emerge at the intersection of virtual and physical worlds, where virtual precision and high resolution become pivotal to value creation. So this is not a video shot by a drone. What you see here is a software camera moving through GeoSim's Virtual Vancouver, a 15 square kilometer and growing 3D replica city testbed. Given its scope, the model is a first of its kind in the world, combining 5 to 10 centimeters absolute spatial precision, 1 to 2 centimeters relative precision, and 1 centimeter visual resolution. Objects, windows, doors, fire hydrants can have a unique identity, can carry data, can be interacted with, and it's rendered in real time in the Unity visualization engine. Virtual Vancouver's uniqueness is also based on a machine learning assisted production pipeline that overcomes the technical and economic obstacles faced by traditional modeling techniques. So we can actually do this at scale. This vision of augmenting every major city in the world with a lifelike digital replica that facilitates unlimited digital experimentation and iteration is actually now feasible. And it's our contention that high precision, high resolution virtual models provide a platform and an environment for having new and better conversations about designing our future. In fact, they allow us to become much more experimental and see what the in-context result looks like and feels like. So precision, resolution, and immersive interactivity work together to create this ground truth platform that paves the way for illuminating, accounting for, and driving out waste that's currently hidden in plain sight. So to describe how game-like realistic 3D city models open up new possibilities for proponents of sustainability, I'm going to touch on very quickly how we see sustainability and suggest we broaden the way that we see waste. Then we'll turn to the key challenges faced by cities and why extending this thinking to these new wastes is critical to the well-being of city dwellers 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We'll address what's needed to change this game, how 3D city replicas can be a pivotal tool to help reduce and eliminate these wastes. And then I'll describe how we built Virtual Vancouver, which provides some of these new capacities, and talk about a few key use cases. So sustainability equals zero waste. What does that mean? Put simply, use nature as a guiding force. There's no waste in nature. Everything is recycled. A zero waste approach respects the future by living and doing business in ways that don't erode the potential for future generations. So in our view, to move into that, we really need to extend our understanding of waste. What thoughts come to mind when I use the word waste? Single-use items that end up in a landfill, poor gas mileage, loss of thermal energy in a building, time spent waiting. These are well known, they're easy to account for. They're wastes that we came to recognize as we moved through the industrial age. But they're actually insufficient for seeing today's challenges. How about getting the wrong information? Bad information, too little information, too much. Let's call these information age wastes, interpretations of waste that we invented alongside record keeping in IT. They're part of the picture. They're harder to fit into our traditional accounting systems, but still they don't cover the whole range. The wastes you've been watching in the past are not the wastes you need to be watching in the future. That's Chauncey Bell, a good friend and mentor who's been deeply involved in the world of lean construction. Today, we're in the network age, where what matters is relationships and decentralized coordination. What's invisible to most is that productivity is actually a three-legged stool, and we've been focusing on just two legs, things and the location of things. We forget about the relationship part or take it for granted. Traditional accounting doesn't see this waste. This is the waste we need to be looking out for, coordination or relationship waste. The vast waste that occurs in the conversational layer, which surrounds how we deal with things and their location. I'm going to get a little academic. This is an academic warning for about 2 minutes. Every coordination begins with a conversation, right? That I'm standing here evolved from conversations. You sitting there, the building we're in, the coffee in our cups, all the result of a network of conversations. Some effective, some not so much. It turns out that there's a universal science to having effective conversations to coordinate action. And like chemistry's periodic table, effective conversation relies on a basic set of elements or moves. Basically, with 6 basic language moves, we invent the future in conversations. When this goes wrong, or when we skip key components, we produce distrust that infects the future. It makes it more difficult to do things in the future. When we assume that the facts should be obvious, we set the stage for conflict. When we fail to distinguish fact from opinions, assertions from assessments, we make a mess. When our requests or offers or promises miss the point on fundamental concerns, when we overwhelm with information, when we stop listening because we're trying to process dense information coming at us. So anything that produces distrust or resentment or anger, anything that degrades our ability to maintain relationships in the network of people we need to coordinate with to produce value, that's modern waste. And that's where things begin to translate into a loss of capital. And this is also where it becomes important to access a new conversational space, which I'm going to argue is what we provide with our emphasis on precision, resolution, visible context, and immersive interactivity, in the service of providing sort of a factual ground truth representation of the city. So let's move from the abstract to the concrete, a few examples from the real world. How about infrastructure projects that begin with a price tag of $250 million and end up at $6.5 billion? Or property development proposals that make it all the way through an expensive and time-consuming process only to be denied at the last moment? Or city plans to build public amenities being challenged by not in my backyard voices who don't want their neighborhood to become a destination for other city dwellers, your fellow citizens. An endless thrashing, of course, over public transit and infrastructure investment. So we should pay attention to relationship era waste for 2 reasons. First, we're at the beginning now of this 30-year period that will take us to 2050. A 30-year period that demands we cope with continuing urbanization and a storm of disruptive technology that's going to hit energy and transportation and other fields. A period in which we need to deal with climate change and with governance, especially in a world of increasing transparency and decentralization of power. We need to intensify and improve the conversations we have with stakeholders, including citizens, in order to transform cities to become platforms for energy efficient, transportation efficient, livable ways of being. So second, we're in the midst of a social media epidemic that's all but destroyed civic and political dialogue. It's a phenomenon of the network age in which it's hard to distinguish between facts, alternative facts, ungrounded assessments, and ungrounded opinions. So-called public dialogue is this soup of anger, resentment, contempt, arrogance, deep distrust, cheap shots. Seems like productivity improvement has peaked, complexity is on the rise, risk elements are increasing, and relationship and coordination waste are out of control. We're in a crisis of trust. Let's bring this down to street level, which is where we build the city of the future. No one's satisfied. Planners lack a holistic model in which to work and struggle to align long-term concerns with election cycles and day-to-day decisions. Design professionals depend too much on others accurately imagining three-dimensional futures and sometimes find themselves forced to implement ideas driven by stakeholders who may not understand or refuse to hear or care about the implications. Developers feel squeezed by ancillary costs and unpredictability from city stakeholders. And the mood of the general public is that they don't know what's going on, and there's definitely a conspiracy behind every one of those projects that are going on. And they also don't trust the information that they're being given by the city or its developers. And unless we address this, we're not going to address these challenges that are coming down the road towards us. What's needed for a lot of these critical conversations about urbanization, climate change, and governance is a shift in perspective. Researchers are looking at the overview effect, which is a phenomenon first reported by astronauts and best summarized in this quote, "We went to the moon as technicians and returned as humanitarians." The view of the Earth from space, putting everything in context, consistently creates cognitive changes in those who are able to experience it. Bernhard Ricke and his team at SFU are looking at deeply immersive experiences, how virtual reality experiences can cultivate the overview effect without going into space. They and others have noticed that well-designed, high-fidelity VR experiences can shift people's moods to become more open. And the ability to interact in an immersive environment where suddenly you have superpowers like the ability to fly, produces actually what they call pro-social as opposed to anti-social moods. So let's start doing this, right? Let's begin the work of cultivating these pro-social moods at a city level when we're trying to engage people in civil conversation about complex built environment scenarios. Let's deliver information as an experience, in context and as needed. Let's not make stakeholders do that hard work of assembling the bits and pieces we fire hose at them. Let's not make them construct mental models of 3D futures. Let's set the stage to actually make it easier to listen and have a dialogue. Instead of overwhelming people with data, let's literally transport them into a proposed future in a context they already know and understand, to allow them to see and feel the effects of proposed built environment changes in a precise and believable replica of the world that blends what exists in reality today with what exists in design. Massive changes are coming. Looking 10 years down the road, we have to be able to show what our city looks and feels like with somewhere between 40 and 80% less cars. That is really hard to imagine. So GeoSim produces what we call digital infrastructure in the form of high precision, high resolution, immersive and interactive 3D city models that you can move through like a game. Our vision is to leverage these city models across a wide variety of use cases to become a platform for a new generation of location-oriented immersive applications. But let's go through the challenges of building large-scale replica cities and how we go about it. Because it's one thing to aim at this level of fidelity and realism if you're modeling 2 buildings or 2 blocks. It's another challenge entirely if you're trying to do this over tens or hundreds of square kilometers. First and foremost, you have to collect a lot of raw data, LiDAR and imagery, among others, while keeping careful track of location. As anybody who's used Google or Apple Maps will recognize, if you use those in a dense urban environment, sometimes you're off by meters, and that's the GPS problem. Satellite signals are bouncing and blocked. Second, you have to find a way of co-registering and fusing all that data, pulling it all together. Then you have to find a way of optimizing the production pipeline and maximizing automation. And because the overall process still requires human involvement, you need to find ways of ensuring that a decentralized production process generates pieces that snap back together without generating error. And fourth, as you're transforming that dense data into 3D models, you need to be careful about optimizing the geometry and its textures so that the results can be rendered in real time. GeoSim's process begins by collecting data from the air and the ground. To get street-level precision, we use a sensor rig on a car that moves in 15-meter increments, with each stop collecting 40 to 50 million LiDAR measurements and full 360 degrees of high-res imagery. You can see we collect an order of magnitude more data than Google does, but that in itself is no big deal, because the real challenge lies in what you do with that data. How you co-register and fuse it, how you maintain precise location without depending on GPS. And that's an area where we have patents, including one that covers the creation of what we call mega clouds, which is how we stitch the data together into a rigid model and require only a few ground anchor points to get to our 5 to 10 centimeters absolute spatial precision. Once we have pre-processed the data, it enters this scalable production pipeline that allows us to orchestrate automated and human work. And the production system allows us to scale the human element by segmenting city building into blocks and sending a 3D Studio Max artist the whole package of raw and processed data to complete a block. Once they're done, this all snaps seamlessly back into place. Our teams can range from 4 to 400 or more. Totally depends on the size of the project. And the production process itself is constantly being optimized. We started by building 3D Studio Max plugins, but now we focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence to transform visual data into light geometry. I'll show you an example here. So this is the product of one of the world's best automated image to 3D model generators. You can see it's very noisy, very heavy, hundreds, maybe thousands of polygons. Using the data that we've collected in Vancouver, our team has trained neural network algorithms to automate the process of distinguishing roofs and walls. The result, 3D objects with minimal geometric complexity. We're now moving on to automating further object isolations like doors and windows. When we started, we had to build our own rendering and visualization engine. And today we publish in Unity. And that environment allows us to offer our city worlds as platforms on which partners and clients can build interactive applications. So we'll look at 3 representative use cases. Rezoning and permitting, currently bogged down in data, paper, physical models. A typical city engagement, and this is well-intentioned to maximize transparency, presents a lot of data in poster boards, renderings, and these physical models. It's hard for stakeholders to mentally integrate all that data, and even harder for project proponents to ensure that everyone understands this 3D future in the same way. So here's a simple example of doing this in a different way using the TELUS building at Georgia and Seymour. Let's say this was the as-is environment as we originally captured and modeled that location. We can explore the site from any height, any angle, including at street level. Here's an opportunity to engage stakeholders right at the beginning of the process by having a conversation about the future of the space, right in the space itself. What does the proposed design look and feel like? Well, this kind of tells us what it might look like, but what does it feel like at street level? Renderings don't tell us much, even when they're set in context and photoshopped into the world. In fact, they often produce distrust because they impose this single artificial perspective. Let's bring in the transformed Revit model and set it in the context of the buildings it'll actually live with, and then let's move through the space. You can see that this is a completely different experience, which we can deliver with a game-like feel on traditional devices or in virtual reality headsets. In the near future, we'll be able to allow dozens of people to share this kind of immersive experience. At the moment, we're deepening the functionality by working on an application that'll help designers tell the story of the design, display critical data when it's requested, and to give guided tours of proposed projects. So if you remember the slide about relationship or coordination waste, here we're bringing the stakeholder into a precise replica of a space they're already familiar with. We're working with a shared ground truth, so we don't need to argue about facts. That alone begins to build trust. Second, we're not fire hosing data at people, so we're not overloading their cognitive bandwidth. That means that instead of building a mental model of what the data and the renderings are describing, the stakeholder actually has the mental space to listen and have a conversation. Now, I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet. There are a number of other steps that have to be taken to improve these conversations, but we are providing a space and setting the stage for better conversations, for reducing waste, and for accelerating decisions and action. We're also able to strip back into box models, leaving out detail that can distract during the early stages of design and context fitting. The latest versions of Unity have dynamic lighting, which makes it much easier to generate shadow studies. Again, the combination of a precise replica with the ability to experience data rather than have to mentally model it or transform it from 2 dimensions into 3 in your head, this makes a huge difference. Let's move to simulation. It's an example of where complex data and science can be transformed into visual experiences that produce immediate emotional and rational insight. Flooding experts generate these kinds of artifacts when they're asked to predict the effects of rising ocean levels, combining with king tides, combining with storm surges. I don't know about you, but this kind of representation of data just kind of leaves me flat. It doesn't really produce anything in me. I tried reading the 140-page report behind this to understand it. That attempt lasted about 5 minutes. And I can imagine that same effect sort of hitting city councilors and other politicians and people who work for the city, not to mention the general public. It's hard to understand this stuff. So when we first did this demo, we used a sensor in a glass of water to send signals to Virtual Vancouver to raise the level of the water. Now, this is an exaggeration in certain places, and it's not based on the actual data, but it's a proof of concept, right? It's a proof of concept that we can feed data produced by complex algorithms and scenarios into this interactive and immersive environment, into this world. That's the experience we're going to need if we want to move citizens and politicians into action on infrastructure or other preparedness initiatives and investments. Data and rational thought alone don't move this kind of investment. We need to transform data into experiences that resonate with the whole human being and not just the rational part. So a third example touches on public safety and highlights how we're a platform that can be used by application partners. This is how first responders prepare for and train for scenarios using tabletop exercises. And this is a video of a virtual reality first responder training application running on top of Virtual Vancouver. Fire chiefs have told us that there's a world of difference between training in a geotypical model and training in a replica of an actual response environment. And it's because immersive experiences produce knowledge and memory in the body. That's what you want from training. We've just been sole sourced to do this kind of work for a transit client in a large North American city with our Unity partner from the Netherlands. You might see from that set of diverse use cases that GeoSim is not a traditional data product or a traditional company. We're not primarily focused on processing raw data and selling data products. We're also building a network era company or a platform organization. This slide is from Simon Cicero, who's one of the leading voices in the platform space, and it neatly summarizes the distinction between traditional companies and network or relationship era companies. At the moment, we consider the 15 square kilometers that we've modeled as a minimum viable product sandbox. We're working on doing the rest of the city. We're interested in partnering with developers and architects to enable them to experiment with this next generation way of collaborating with stakeholders in the design, rezoning, and permitting stages. And the potential that we're trying to express here is the possibility of actively building trust and eliminating network era wastes. We think our platform will help participants learn from each other and help each other. So the key here is to leverage these high precision, high resolution interactive worlds to provide a trusted ground truth for conversations about the future of the built environment. Renderings produce distrust, reams of 2D information produce a sense of overwhelm, a confusion of fact and opinion, and that cultivates resentment and deepens distrust. We see this potential for creating value by opening a new space for conversations, for building trust and constructive moods in an immersive environment that reflects ground truth and empowers the stakeholders to escape the confines of renderings and the oppressiveness of data overwhelm. We see a potential for more transparency. We see a potential for richer and broader stakeholder engagement, bringing producers and consumers together in ways where they create value for each other in every part of the process. And we see a potential for transforming the wastes produced by traditional processes into social, political, and financial capital. So lowering cost, lowering risk, improving margins. So we started this presentation by making a point about the power of perception, the power of experience. The capacity to turn data into experience and experience into insight is critical for cities to meet the governance, climate change, and infrastructure challenges of the next 30 years. And we consider ourselves to be here to help.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Once again, questions for Chris from the audience? I'm sure there's probably a lot of interest. Yes.
Brent Mowdy, IBI Group. The operation simulation you showed on the outside, do you extend that, because I'm just thinking from a building's perspective, I could imagine campus-wide evacuation and operation simulation. Could that extend internal to like hospital operation or industrial plants, or is it really city site-based?
It very well could. So we've got some demonstrations where we're inserting the interior 3D model into its context. And in fact, that's another sort of area of this new generation of applications that we foresee. You can probably easily imagine how this would work in the world of real estate, right? That suddenly you move into a world where you're actually able to explore not just the interior of a space, but the neighborhood that it's in 24/7, without leaving your home, and then narrowing down what you actually want to go look at before you make a decision to buy. So yeah, the interiors fit as well.
Interesting. Good. Might get you moved closer to the mic.
I have a question too. My name is Thomas Borman. I have a consulting firm in BIM. I just, last week I attended the opening of a fire station in Seattle. And I asked one of the chiefs, wouldn't it be nice you have a model of the actual building where the fire is? So while you're driving there, you could study the building, the entrances, the staircases, and maybe even know where the fire is and the people. So this would be a nice combination with what you have to offer, a model of the streets. Maybe you can add the traffic too, when the fire truck moves there.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the word trust very often. And I mean, I see the big advantages of what you do. It's just, you know how it is with, if I take a picture with my phone now, and I can alter it within 3 minutes, and it looks different. So that would be, how can I be sure that the model you give me didn't erase one building you didn't like, kind of thing?
Yeah,
you know,
that's very fair. And so we've been in discussions, in part with the city and in part with some organizations here in town, about sort of becoming the neutral ground, right? The version control authority for the city. It needs something like that, yeah. And I've probably had a conversation with those same fire chiefs in Seattle. And yeah, and a lot of the detail that is produced in BIM, when a building goes into operation, it seems to be lost. And that detail can be used so far down the road, including by fire people. They want to know what those materials are. We want to know what those materials are. If we knew what all the materials were, the physics engine, could simulate an earthquake, and it'll show you how that building will collapse.
Wow. Yes.
Nate Calderon from George Brown College. With regards to the data that you collect, I guess I'm only assuming it's photogrammetry or LiDAR technology. Where are you storing all the large files and raw scans, let's say, for example? It cloud-based, or would it be?
That's all, I mean, that, for us, that's all kind of work in progress storage, and our aim is to sort of strip that down into these light models.
So basically, you will have portions of the city in the example of Vancouver, and then share it cloud-based, so to speak?
I think I understand what you're, so how are we going to help people access?
Yes,
the
and of
models?
course,
Yeah.
storage of all that huge
Yeah.
data.
Yeah, I think ultimately that has to be probably pre-rendered in the cloud and streamed. So there are video game technologies. Really neat stuff emerging where, you know, your entire processor and the GPUs are sitting down in San Diego, but you can actually play a video game here in Vancouver using that. So control, you know, just sending control signals.
Okay, last question. So the collaboration will be live? If I want to bring or import a Revit model, for example?
So, yeah, there's a longer conversation to be had there about the import of BIM models, and I've been having it with a couple of people. It is not as easy as we would like because the models are often messy, and most of the work is actually in cleaning them up. Sometimes we found that it's faster just to recreate the exterior than it is to clean up what we're given. But that's something that we just haven't systematically tackled, and we're actually starting to move on to tackling.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, keeping your model of the city current would require participation with the architects, providing you, and like you said, maybe not the model.
Participation with the city.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could, you know, we're trying to structure this in such a way that it becomes attractive for the city to, and they want this, they just don't want the headache of managing it all. So
Right.
we're finding our way there. It's all part of the process of innovation, right? How do you change those practices?
So something that also comes to mind is historical value. So how the city is now and how the city will be in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. I know City of Yellowknife is using drone technology to do photographical records, creating a point cloud and 3D geometry there to keep track of certain aspects of their city. And as we saw from presentation earlier today, a photo of 1980 Vancouver and 2000, right? And that was 18 years ago. I'm sure that picture has changed again. Having that data on hand so we can look at what we've done in the past and how we can move forward in the future.
Yeah, it's actually, it would be an interesting way of, sorry. It'd be an interesting way of addressing a lot of the heritage concerns, right?
Yeah.
As just, these buildings will exist forever, at least virtually.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can go back and visit them, right?
So what interest have you had from other parts of across Canada or across North America for the use of this type of technology?
We've got a very strong conversation going on in Nashville now. We're just we're in the beginning stages of pivoting from a very, very long R&D cycle to, you know, beginning to get into sales and marketing. It's like all of the pieces are finally at a point where we're comfortable rolling out.
Right.
So yeah, so Nashville is on our list, and we've got little pilot projects pending. So one in Los Angeles for a small section of downtown. We're getting interest from airports for the same reasons, because airports are sort of their own municipality almost, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And universities as well.
Yeah, oh, interesting. Oh, very good. Right on. Any other questions for Chris? Yes.
So I'm Guillermo Carvalho with BIM Experts and GI Consultants. And I was wondering, because we have been talking a lot about the existing conditions modeling, and from what I saw, you use LiDAR on the streets, and then all of that point cloud data is processed using neural networks and machine learning. I wonder how much human input are you putting in, and how smart is the machine while processing that data, and how you validate all that. Like, do you have like just the process itself on gathering the data and processing it? Because that's how does that work?
You know, I'm not sure that I'm fully competent to give you a clear, non-bullshit answer to that.
Well, but because I was like, most of the times people would like take pictures or try to create a point cloud and then model on top of it.
Yeah.
But from what you said, it's pretty well shaped around like just removing the noise and working the data you have instead of just recreating, as you said, like, oh, I received this model. It's just better if I just recreate the exterior. As in the existing conditions, you're just shooting the LiDAR, and then you are shaping that into the final form that it's going to be. Is it like more to that side or more to the just base
So I
stuff?
don't know if I'm going to answer your question properly, but essentially what we're doing is we're taking all of that data, and we've actually gotten to the point where we don't think we need to do LiDAR from the air anymore, where the photogrammetry gives us, I think, 900 points per square meter or something like that. But the real challenge is how you take that data and co-register it with data that you're capturing every 15 meters on the ground and make sure everything aligns properly. And then kind of packaging it up and giving it to, you know, putting it through that production pipeline where some pieces are automated and then some pieces you still need a human being to do, like the isolating roofs and walls. That used to be a human task.
Work that to be an automated
Right. And
step. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's, as you said,
Yeah, so
work in
we're-
progress, but it's still like just working for the best.
Right,
like-
and you can only do it by trying to do something crazy at this scale, right?
Yeah.
Where you're collecting 100 square kilometers of data, and yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, amazing.
Very good. Right on. Thank you, Chris. Okay, thank you, Chris. That was a very informative and very interesting presentation.